The Verithen orbital station hung in the empty black of space like a giant metal city that someone forgot to finish. It was huge, 900 levels stacked on top of each other, home to 40 million people from dozens of different alien species. Ships came and went every hour, bringing traders, diplomats, tourists, and workers from across the galaxy. It should have been a symbol of progress and unity. Instead, it had become famous for one thing: the elevator that didn't work. Right in the middle of the station, running through all 900 levels like a spine, sat the gravitational lift. It wasn't just any elevator. This thing was ancient, built by the predecessors. A civilization so advanced and so mysterious that nobody even knew what they looked like anymore. They'd vanished thousands of years ago, leaving behind technology that still made the smartest minds in the galaxy scratch their heads. The elevator was one of their masterpieces. It could move people from the bottom level to the top in less than 30 seconds without anyone feeling like they'd moved at all. No cables, no mechanics that anyone could understand. Just smooth, perfect transportation. Except it had been broken for 500 years. 500 years. Every species in the Galactic Council had taken their shot at fixing it. The Verithen, who owned the station, were bug-like creatures with minds like supercomputers. They'd spent decades taking apart every single circuit, measuring every wire, analyzing every energy signature. They built models and simulations and brought in their best engineers. Nothing worked. Then came the Lumina, beings made of pure energy who could see things other species couldn't even imagine. They spent a whole century, 100 years, calculating probability fields and quantum possibilities. They mapped out every possible way the elevator could be broken and every possible way to fix it. They came up with nothing. The Construct network threw everything they had at the problem next. These weren't living creatures but artificial intelligences, millions of synthetic minds linked together with computing power that would make Earth's best supercomputers look like pocket calculators. They dedicated resources equivalent to 1,000 planets worth of processing. They ran simulations. They analyzed data. They tried everything their vast digital minds could imagine. They failed too. After that, species after species took their turn. The crystal beings, the hive minds, the dimensional travelers, the mathematicians from the cold worlds. All of them failed. The elevator stayed silent and dead, its doors sealed shut, mocking everyone who tried. Life on the station went on, but it was annoying as hell. Instead of that beautiful 30-second ride, people had to use shuttle pods that flew up and down the outside of the station. What should have taken half a minute now took 40 minutes of waiting, boarding, flying, and unloading. Imagine living in a 100-story building where the elevator was broken, and you had to take a bus to get to your apartment. Every single day. It wasn't just inconvenient. It was humiliating. Here was the Galactic Council, representing the most advanced civilizations in known space, and they couldn't fix one elevator. Tourists took pictures of the sealed doors like it was some kind of monument to failure. Engineers from young species would visit just to say they'd seen the impossible problem. The station authorities stopped talking about it publicly. It was easier to just pretend the shuttle system was always the plan. Then something changed. Humanity joined the Galactic Council. Humans were new. Really new. They'd only discovered faster-than-light travel a few years earlier, and they'd been part of the Council for less than 2 years. Most of the older species saw them as cute but primitive, like children playing at the adults' table. Humans still used combustion engines in some places. They still had physical books. They fixed things with tape and glue. They were thousands of years behind everyone else technologically. The Verithen administration was getting desperate, though. 500 years of failure was 500 years too long. So someone had an idea. What if they invited the humans to take a look? Maybe a fresh perspective would help. Plus, if humanity failed, and everyone assumed they would, at least it would make the other failures look less bad. At least humans had an excuse for not being able to fix predecessor technology. So they sent a formal request to Earth. Please send someone to examine our elevator problem. Earth's response surprised them. They didn't send a scientist or a research team. They didn't send someone with fancy degrees or a list of publications. They sent a guy named Jake Mitchell. Jake showed up on a Tuesday morning with a metal toolbox that looked like it had survived a war. The paint was chipped, the corners were dented, and the latches were held together with wire in some places. He wore work boots that had seen better days, pants with permanent grease stains, and a faded blue jumpsuit with his name stitched on the pocket. He was maybe 40 years old, with calloused hands and the kind of tired eyes that came from years of getting woken up at 3 in the morning to fix broken machinery. The Verithen receiving committee stood at the docking bay waiting for him, expecting someone impressive. When Jake walked down the ramp carrying his beat-up toolbox, They looked at each other in confusion. This was humanity's expert? This guy who looked like he should be fixing air conditioners in someone's basement? The head of the committee barely hid his disappointment. Some of the junior engineers actually laughed. But Jake Mitchell had a reputation back on Earth. He was the guy you called when nobody else could figure it out. He'd fixed nuclear reactors with spare parts. He'd gotten colony ships running again when the manuals said they were dead. He didn't have fancy equipment or expensive education. He just had 30 years of making broken things work again, and that was about to be enough. Thelvan stood about 8 feet tall, with a body that looked like someone crossed a praying mantis with a lobster and gave it 6 arms. He was the head of the Verathen Engineering Corps, which meant he was basically the smartest technical mind on a station of 40 million people. His compound eyes could see in 17 different wavelengths. His brain could process calculations that would take human computers hours to finish. He'd spent 40 years of his life studying predecessor technology. Right now, he was watching a human ignore everything he had to say. Thelvan had led Jake to the observation deck that overlooked the elevator shaft. It was an impressive room, all sleek metal and glowing panels. 16 specialists from 8 different species sat at monitoring stations arranged in a circle. Holographic displays floated in the air everywhere you looked. Graphs, charts, 3-dimensional models of the elevator's internal components, streams of data flowing like waterfalls made of numbers and symbols. The room hummed with the sound of advanced technology doing advanced things. Thelvan gestured at the displays with 2 of his arms, clearly proud of what they'd accomplished. His voice came out as a series of clicks and chirps, but a small device on his chest translated it into English that sounded oddly flat and mechanical. "We have compiled 5 centuries of diagnostic data," he explained, pulling up a hologram that showed the elevator shaft in perfect detail. Molecular degradation analysis across all components. Quantum field harmonics measurements taken every standard hour. Temporal flux readings dating back 300 years. Gravitational coefficient variations. Energy signature mapping down to the individual particle level. We have run 4 million simulations of possible failure points and... Cool, Jake said, not even looking at the fancy displays. He was already walking past Thelvan, past the monitoring stations, past all the expensive equipment, heading straight for the actual elevator doors. Thelvan's antennae twitched, the Verathen equivalent of a confused frown. "The data is comprehensive. Surely you wish to review the analysis before you?" But Jake wasn't listening. He'd pulled a screwdriver from his belt, an actual physical screwdriver, the kind with a handle and a metal tip, and was prying open the maintenance panel next to the elevator doors. The panel popped off with a metallic clang that echoed through the observation deck. Every alien engineer stopped what they were doing and stared. Jake stuck his head right into the opening, shining a flashlight up into the dark shaft. The beam of light was weak and yellow compared to the brilliant holographic displays filling the room. He moved the light around slowly, looking at things with his actual eyes. The specialists exchanged glances. One of them, a crystalline being from the Lumina homeworld, leaned over to a colleague. "Is the human's visual scanning equipment malfunctioning? That illumination source seems extremely primitive." Another engineer, this one from the Construct Network with a body that was more machine than organic, pulled up data on human technology. "That is their standard inspection tool. A portable light source powered by chemical batteries. No scanning capability. No data recording. It simply produces photons in the visible spectrum." They couldn't believe it. These aliens had instruments that could look through solid walls and count individual atoms. They had sensors that could detect energy fluctuations 1,000 years in the past. They had scanning technology that could map the inside of a star. And this human was using a flashlight. Jake's voice echoed out from inside the shaft. "Smells burnt in here." Thelvan stepped closer, his translator struggling to process what seemed like a meaningless observation. "Olfactory detection is not a recognized diagnostic method for..." "Yeah, but something definitely burned at some point," Jake called back. "You can smell the carbon residue. Also, there's some kind of oil leaking down here. When's the last time anyone actually looked at the physical components?" Thelvan pulled out his data pad and scrolled through centuries of records. His arms moved in a blur across the holographic interface. "Physical inspection is unnecessary. Our remote sensing technology can analyze all components without requiring direct access. We have complete molecular scans of every system, updated in real time. There is no need for tactile examination when our instruments provide data accurate to the quantum level." Jake pulled his head out of the shaft and looked at Thelvan like he just said something crazy. "Yeah, okay, but when did someone actually get in there and look around? Like with their eyes? Touch stuff?" Check if things are loose or stuck or corroded. Thelvan consulted his pad again, going back through the records. 500 years of data. Millions of scan results. Thousands of analysis reports. Countless simulations. He scrolled and then stopped. It appears, he said slowly, that no physical internal inspection has been performed since the system failure occurred. Wait, what? Jake stood up straight, nearly hitting his head on the panel. You're telling me that in 500 years, nobody actually went inside to look? Our scanning technology makes that unnecessary, Thelvan repeated, but his voice had less confidence now. We can see everything from outside. Why would we need to physically enter when we have complete data? Jake stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the other engineers, at their fancy equipment, at the holographic displays showing every possible measurement and calculation. He looked back at the dark elevator shaft with his weak little flashlight beam. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered. Then louder, I'm gonna need a ladder. A tall one. And maybe some work lights. Oh, and if anyone's got a spare pair of gloves, that'd be great. It's pretty grimy in there. The specialists looked at each other, completely lost. The human wanted to climb inside the shaft? Manually? Using primitive equipment? With no advanced sensors or protective force fields. Thelvan's antennae drooped in what might have been resignation. He'd brought the human here. He might as well let him try whatever backwards method he thought would work. I will retrieve a ladder, he said quietly. Jake grinned and cracked his knuckles. Great. Let's actually see what's broken. Jake disappeared into the elevator shaft with a ladder, a toolbox and a battery-powered work light that he clipped to his belt. The alien engineers gathered around their monitoring stations, watching their instruments track his every move. They could see him as a heat signature, a mass reading, and electromagnetic disturbance in the shaft. Their screens showed him climbing down the ladder, stopping at various levels, touching things. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. What is he doing? Asked one of the Vera then junior engineers, staring at her display. According to her instruments, Jake had spent 20 minutes at level 63 doing absolutely nothing except standing in one place. He appears to be manually examining junction boxes, Thelvan replied, zooming in on the sensor data. He is removing access panels and making physical contact with internal components. A Lumina being, its body glowing a soft blue, floated closer to look at the readings. I have been researching human maintenance techniques in our database. This behavior matches what they call troubleshooting. It involves direct observation and tactile inspection rather than computational analysis. Another sound echoed up from the shaft, a loud bang followed by 2 more in quick succession. Every alien in the room jumped. Alarms started flashing on several monitoring stations. Energy spike detected, someone shouted. Is the system destabilizing? Negative, Thelvan said, studying his readings carefully. The human appears to be striking components with a tool. A rubber impact device of some kind. The Lumina being consulted its research again. Ah yes. They call this percussive maintenance. It is a primitive diagnostic technique involving kinetic force application. The theory is that striking a malfunctioning component may temporarily restore function or reveal failure points through auditory feedback. He is hitting it? A crystalline engineer looked horrified. He is striking predecessor technology with a hammer? A rubber mallet, according to the density readings, the Lumina corrected. Less likely to cause damage than a metal hammer, but still quite crude. More time passed. Jake moved from level to level, his work light casting shadows that the sensors tracked. He removed panels, touched wires, tapped on housings and muttered to himself. The aliens couldn't hear what he was saying, but their instruments picked up the vibrations of his voice echoing in the shaft. Finally, after 3 hours, Jake climbed back up the ladder. He was covered in dust and grime, his jumpsuit streaked with oil stains and dirt that looked like it had been there for centuries. In his hands, he carried a component about the size of a coffee cup. It had a metal housing covered in strange symbols, the writing of the predecessors that no one had been able to fully translate. The moment Jake stepped onto the observation deck, every alien engineer pointed their scanners at the component. Holographic displays lit up around the room, showing every possible measurement and analysis. Thelvan studied the results, his antennae twitching in confusion. This relay shows 93% functionality across all measured parameters. Energy conductivity is optimal. Molecular structure shows no significant degradation. All quantum signatures are within acceptable ranges. It is well within operational specifications. Jake set the component down on a workbench with a heavy thunk. Dust puffed up around it. Yeah, it works fine, he said, wiping his hands on his already dirty jumpsuit. Problem is, it's stuck. The observation deck went completely silent. 16 engineers from 8 different species all stopped what they were doing and stared at Jake. Thelvan's translator took a moment to process, like it couldn't believe what it was translating. Stuck. Stuck, Jake confirmed. He picked up the component and turned it over, pointing to a small valve inside the housing. It was barely visible, maybe the size of a pencil eraser. See this bypass valve right here? It's supposed to toggle between 2 positions depending on how much load the system is under. When traffic is light, it sits in position A. When traffic gets heavy, it switches to position B. Simple automatic system. He jiggled the valve with his finger. It didn't move. But this little guy has been stuck in the middle for probably 500 years. Maybe longer. So what happens is the elevator's control system keeps trying to route power through it, can't figure out which position it's in, tries to compensate, creates a feedback loop, and the whole thing locks up to prevent damage. Jake looked around at the confused faces. Well, the alien equivalent of confused faces. Your scans showed it as functional, because technically it is. The valve works. The relay works. Everything works. It's just physically stuck in the wrong position. Like if a door works perfectly fine, but someone jammed a rock under it. The door isn't broken. It's just stuck. One of the engineers from the construct network stepped forward. Its body was mostly mechanical, with a brain that was part computer and part organic tissue. When it spoke, its voice came through synthesizers. We have run 17 billion simulations of possible system failures. We modeled every conceivable type of degradation, damage, and malfunction. A mechanically stuck valve was not included in our parameters. The probability of such a simple mechanical failure in predecessor technology seemed too simple. Jake finished, starting to smile. Yeah, that's exactly the problem. You guys were looking for something complicated. Some crazy quantum malfunction or molecular decay or whatever. You were thinking like the predecessors were gods who built perfect technology that could only fail in exotic, complicated ways. He tapped the relay with his finger. But they weren't gods. They were just people, or whatever they were, who built really good stuff. And really good stuff can still break in really dumb ways. A stuck valve. That's it. That's the big mystery everyone's been trying to solve for 5 centuries. A piece of metal that won't move. Thelvan looked at his instruments, then at the relay, then back at his instruments. His mind, capable of processing calculations at incredible speeds, seemed to have completely stalled out. A stuck valve, he repeated quietly. A stuck valve, Jake confirmed. Somewhere in the observation deck, an engineer started laughing. Then another. Soon half the room was making whatever sounds their species made when something was funny or absurd or so ridiculous it wrapped back around to being hilarious. 500 years. 40 species. Trillions of credits spent on research. And the answer was a stuck valve. The laughter died down and reality set in. They'd found the problem. Now they had to fix it. Thelvan immediately went into engineer mode. His 6 arms started moving across holographic displays, pulling up schematics and running calculations. We need to determine the exact force required to manipulate the valve without damaging the housing material, he announced. The predecessor alloys are extremely durable, but we cannot risk structural compromise. I will need to calculate the precise angle of approach, the optimal pressure points, and the numbers and graphs started filling the air around him. Stress analysis charts. Force vectors. Material composition breakdowns. The lumina being joined in, its glowing body pulsing brighter as it thought. I will construct a probability matrix for successful manipulation, it said in its musical voice. We must account for 500 years of potential material fatigue, quantum uncertainty in the valve's exact position, and temporal variations in. More displays appeared. Probability curves that looked like mountains and valleys made of light. The construct network representative extended a mechanical arm, projecting blueprints into the space above the workbench. I can design a specialized microtool for this operation. Precision manipulator arms with force feedback sensors. Adjustable grip strength measured in micronewtons. The fabrication facility can produce it in 6 to 8 hours, possibly faster if we prioritize the manufacturing queue. The room buzzed with activity. Everyone had ideas. The crystalline engineers suggested using harmonic resonance to vibrate the valve loose. Someone else proposed a microgravity field to reduce friction. Another team started designing a robotic system that could work inside the tight confines of the relay housing. Jake stood there watching them all scramble around, getting more and more complicated with their solutions. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a paperclip. It was just a regular paperclip. The kind you use to hold papers together. Someone back on Earth had probably made 10,000 of them in an hour at some factory. It cost maybe a fraction of a penny. Jake carried a few in his pocket because they were useful for all sorts of things. Poking reset buttons, fishing small parts out of tight spaces, temporarily holding wires in place. He bent the paperclip, straightening it out into a long piece of wire. Thelvan noticed what Jake was doing and froze. "What are you doing?" "Fixing it," Jake said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "But we need to calculate." Jake wasn't listening. He was looking at the relay housing, turning it in his hands, examining it from different angles. There was a gap in the housing, barely visible to the naked eye. The alien scanners had detected it but dismissed it as irrelevant, just a design feature, a thermal expansion gap, nothing important. Jake slid the straightened paperclip into that gap. "Stop." Thelvan reached out with two of his arms. "You could damage the—" There was a soft click. So quiet you could barely hear it. But everyone in the room heard it because the entire observation deck had gone silent. Jake wiggled the paperclip slightly, felt resistance, adjusted the angle, and applied just a tiny bit of pressure. The kind of pressure you learn from 30 years of working with your hands. Not too much, not too little. Just enough. Another click. This one felt different. Final. Jake pulled the paperclip out and held it up to the light, checking if he'd bent it too much. Was fine. He slipped it back into his pocket for later. "There we go," he said, picking up the relay. All unstuck. The engineers just stared at him. Thelvan's antennae were trembling. The Lumina being had dimmed to almost nothing in shock. The Construct Network representative's mechanical body had completely stopped moving, frozen mid-calculation. Jake carried the relay back to the shaft, climbed down the ladder with it and reinstalled it in its housing. He made sure all the connections were tight, closed up the panels and climbed back up. The whole process took maybe 5 minutes. When he got back to the observation deck, he dusted off his hands and walked over to the elevator doors. The doors that hadn't opened in 500 years. The doors that represented the galaxy's greatest failure. He pressed the call button. For a moment nothing happened. The aliens held their breath, or whatever their species did when anxious. Then deep inside the station something woke up. Ancient machinery that had been sleeping for half a millennium stirred. Power flowed through circuits that hadn't seen electricity in longer than some species had existed. The gravitational systems initialized, running through checks that happened so fast human eyes couldn't follow them. The elevator hummed. It was a low, pleasant sound, the kind of hum that told you something powerful and well-made was working exactly as intended. The doors slid open. Smooth. Silent. Perfect. Jake looked inside. The elevator car was beautiful. The walls were made of some material that seemed to shift colors as you looked at it. The floor was spotless, not a single speck of dust like the elevator had been sealed in time. Control panels glowed with soft light, showing all 900 levels of the station. Jake stepped inside. He looked at the buttons, picked one at random, level 450 about halfway up, and pressed it. The doors closed with a gentle whoosh. There was no sensation of movement at all, but the display showed the levels counting up. 1, 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, 100, 200, 300, 400, 450. 30 seconds just like it was supposed to be. The doors opened on level 450. Jake found himself staring at 17 flying news drones, their cameras all pointed at him. Behind them stood what looked like half the Galactic Council administration. Aliens in fancy robes and uniforms, officials with recording devices, security personnel looking confused about whether this was an emergency or a celebration. Word had spread fast. The elevator was moving. The impossible had happened. Jake stepped out of the elevator, reached into his pocket, and held up the paperclip that had fixed 5 centuries of failure. "Found your problem," he said. The cameras loved it. The news hit the Galactic Network like a bomb. Within an hour, every major news organization across 1,000 worlds was running the same story. Within 6 hours, it was the most watched piece of media in Council space. Within a day, Jake Mitchell's face was more famous than most planetary leaders. The headline wrote itself, "Human fixes 500-year-old problem with paperclip." Some species didn't know whether to be impressed or embarrassed. The Vera then tried to spin it as a team effort, technically true since they'd provided the ladder, but nobody was buying it. The Lumina released a statement about how they'd narrowed down the probability fields that led to the solution, which was a polite way of saying they'd done nothing useful for a century. The Construct Network just went silent, probably running calculations on how they'd missed something so obvious. But most of the galaxy? They were fascinated. Scientists and engineers from hundreds of species descended on Verathen Station, all wanting to know the same thing. How did the human find the problem? What advanced scanning technology did Earth possess that could detect what their instruments missed? Jake invited them all to the observation deck and showed them his toolbox. He pulled out his flashlight, a yellow plastic tube with a bulb inside that ran on batteries you bought at any hardware store. Cost, maybe $10. This is your detection equipment? A Verathen scientist asked, genuinely confused. Yep, Jake said, clicking it on and off. It makes light. That's it. That's the whole thing. The Construct Network representative who'd been there for the repair approached next. Its mechanical voice was hesitant. We analyzed your repair methodology. We could not identify the algorithm you used to determine the correct application point for your tool. Please provide the computational model. Jake laughed. There was no algorithm, buddy. I just looked at the thing, saw a gap that looked like I could fit something thin inside and gave it a shot. Took like 30 seconds. But, the precision required. I've been doing this for 30 years, Jake shrugged. After a while you develop a feel for it. The alien engineers looked at each other, completely lost. A feel for it? That wasn't data. That wasn't reproducible. That wasn't science. Later that day Jake found Thelvan standing in the elevator, riding it up and down, just experiencing the smooth movement after 5 centuries of failure. 500 years, Thelvan said quietly when Jake stepped in. 500 years of the galaxy's greatest minds working on this problem. The best scientists, the most powerful computers, the most advanced instruments ever created. And we were defeated by a stuck valve that a human fixed with a piece of bent wire. Jake leaned against the elevator wall as they descended. You weren't defeated. You just got too caught up in looking at the data instead of looking at the thing itself. Happens all the time back on Earth too. Someone will spend hours analyzing why their car won't start, running diagnostics, checking computer codes, and then you pop the hood and see the battery cable fell off. Simple stuff gets overlooked when you're expecting something complicated. But our instruments are flawless, Thelvan insisted. They showed the relay as functional. And they were right. It was functional. Just stuck. Jake pressed the button for level 300. That's the thing about really advanced technology, sometimes it's too good. Your scanners told you exactly what they saw. They didn't lie. But they couldn't tell you about a mechanical problem because that's not what they were looking for. They measured energy, molecular structure, quantum states. They didn't measure whether something was physically stuck in place because why would they? That seemed too simple. Thelvan's antennae drooped. We forgot how to fix things. Little bit, yeah. The news kept spreading and with it came requests. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Planets and stations and ships across the galaxy all started asking the same question. Could Earth send more people like Jake? Turned out, the galaxy had a problem. Most advanced species had built technology that maintained itself, predicted its own failures and fixed problems before they happened. Which was great until something unexpected broke. Then nobody knew what to do because nobody had practiced fixing things in centuries. They'd gotten so dependent on their self-repairing systems that the skill of troubleshooting had basically died out. Humans though. Humans had been fixing broken stuff for their entire history. Every human mechanic, electrician, plumber, and technician had spent years learning how to diagnose problems with incomplete information, limited tools, and equipment that didn't want to cooperate. They'd learned to use their senses, listening for weird sounds, smelling for burning components, feeling for loose connections. They'd learned that sometimes the manual was wrong, and sometimes you had to try stuff just to see what happened. Within weeks, human technicians were being requested across Council space. Earth set up training programs, sending maintenance crews to species that hadn't needed maintenance crews in millennia. They taught aliens how to troubleshoot, how to use basic tools, how to trust their own observations over what instruments told them. Jake stayed on Verathen Station for 6 months, running a training program for anyone who wanted to learn. Thelvan was his first and most dedicated student. The big insectoid engineer learned to put down his scanners and pick up a screwdriver. He learned that intuition and experience weren't primitive substitutes for data, they were partners to it. You needed both. The Galactic Council officially updated their engineering protocols. Every station, every ship, every facility now had to include physical component inspection and human-style troubleshooting methods in their maintenance procedures. Some species found this humiliating, like they were being forced to go backwards technologically. Others called it revolutionary, rediscovering skills their ancestors had forgotten. On the wall beside the elevator, right where millions of people would see it every day, they installed a small display case. Inside sat the paperclip. Just a regular paperclip, bent and slightly scratched from being wedged into ancient machinery. Below it a plaque read, "Fixed by Jake Mitchell, Human Engineer, 2247. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one." And below that, in smaller text that made Jake grin every time he saw it, "Try turning it off and on again." The elevator carried passengers up and down, smooth and perfect, exactly as the predecessors had designed it. All it had needed was someone willing to get their hands dirty and actually look at the problem. Sometimes that's all anything needs. End of story.